Welcome to Top 10 Secret, where the most chilling and haunting horror stories come to life. Restless spirits, deadly curses, and eerie shadows. But the most terrifying of all is the story of the Lighthouse Keeper. A mystery so haunting it will stay with you forever. Do you dare to enter the unknown? Once you hear these stories, there's no turning back. Follow now to uncover the darkest secrets. Story 1. The Lantern Keeper. This village was once peaceful, but then darkness arrived. No one knew when it began, only that every night a red lantern would appear in the forest, and those who followed it never returned. The villagers spoke of a terrifying figure, the Lantern Keeper. A shadowy being draped in a long black cloak, his face hidden behind a mask of rusted chains. In his hand, he carried an oil lantern that never went out, a flame that did not bring light, only guided souls to hell. No one knew when the Lantern Keeper first appeared. Some claimed he was once a night watchman, betrayed and burned alive in crimson flames. His vengeful spirit refused to move on, forever wandering the forest, carrying his lantern as a symbol of retribution. Those who gazed into its light would have their souls devoured, forever trapped as wandering shadows in the endless darkness. But some refused to believe. One night, Marcus, a fearless hunter, decided to put an end to the legend. He did not believe in ghosts or curses. To him, the disappearances were nothing more than superstition or wild animal attacks. Armed with a silver knife and his own oil lantern, Marcus ventured into the forest. He was determined to uncover the truth. The moment he stepped into the woods, Marcus noticed something was wrong. Too quiet. No insects, no rustling leaves, only the sound of his own heartbeat echoing in the silence. Then he saw it. Deep in the trees, a red light flickered in the darkness. Marcus tightened his grip on his knife and moved closer. A tall, cloaked figure stood motionless in the clearing. A rusted metal mask concealed his face. In his hand, he held a flickering lantern, yet it gave off no warmth. The Lantern Keeper. Marcus raised his knife, shouting, "You're nothing but a myth." The Lantern Keeper remained silent. He simply lifted the lantern higher, letting its crimson light fall upon Marcus. Instantly, everything changed. Marcus was no longer in the forest. Before him stood dozens, hundreds of twisted figures, their faces hollow, their eyes black voids. The lost souls. Those who had gazed into the lantern. They reached out to Marcus, their mouths open in silent screams, as if they were crying out. But no sound came. Marcus stumbled backward, trying to scream, but no voice escaped his throat. He felt his body beginning to dissolve. By morning, Marcus was gone. The villagers found his lantern lying on the forest path, but no one dared to touch it. And that night, as darkness swallowed the village, along the path into the woods, 2 red lanterns flickered. A new lantern. A new Lantern Keeper. The curse never ends. People say that on moonless nights, deep within the western forest, a red lantern appears. It never flickers, never vanishes. It simply drifts among the trees, as if searching for someone. The villagers call it the Lantern Keeper. He is not human. He is a ghostly entity cloaked in black, his face concealed behind rusted chains. In his hand, he carries an oil lantern, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Anyone who gazes into that lantern is never seen again. Long ago, this forest was a place of execution for criminals. Among them was a night watchman, falsely accused and burned alive by the villagers. Before his death, he cursed them all. Since then, the darkness of the forest has never been the same. When night falls, the Lantern Keeper emerges, bringing with him a light not meant for the living. Those who dare enter the forest become part of the darkness, Lucas was a young man in the village. He did not believe in old ghost stories. "Ghosts aren't real. These are just tales to scare cowards," he laughed. One night, he decided to prove it. Armed with a sharp sword and a burning torch, he ventured into the forbidden forest. No one stopped him, because they knew he would never return. The moment Lucas stepped into the forest, he felt something was wrong. No insects, no wind. Everything was too silent. Suddenly, the flames of his torch flickered, as if something unseen was devouring the light. And then, he saw it. A tall, shadowy figure draped in a long black cloak stood in the darkness. His face was hidden beneath a mask of rusted chains. In his hand, an oil lantern glowed with an ominous red light. The Lantern Keeper. Lucas gripped his sword tightly and shouted, "You're nothing but a trick. Get out of my way." But the Lantern Keeper said nothing. He simply raised his lantern higher, letting the crimson glow consume Lucas. Instantly, everything changed. Lucas was no longer in the forest. All around him were soulless figures, their faces distorted, their mouths open in silent screams. The cursed souls. They were no longer human. They were shadows, trapped forever in the red glow. Lucas tried to move, to escape, but his body was dissolving. He let out a silent scream, and then he was no more. By morning, Lucas was gone, but something strange happened. That night, along the path to the forest, a new red lantern appeared. The curse continues. The curse of the Lantern Keeper. In a small village by an ancient forest, the people lived in constant fear. Not of wild beasts, nor of bandits, but of a mysterious red lantern. Every night, a flickering light could be seen deep in the woods. It moved slowly, as if searching for someone, and anyone curious enough to follow it was never seen again. The elders of the village told a terrifying tale. Hundreds of years ago, a cruel prison warden had lived in this place. He had no heart, torturing prisoners to death simply for his own twisted pleasure. When he died, his soul was not freed. It was bound to this very land. He became the Lantern Keeper, forever wandering the forest with his oil lantern, luring lost souls into his eternal grasp. Everyone in the village feared the legend, but no one dared to test it. Until one fateful night, Emily, a 10-year-old girl, wandered out of her house after dark. Some say she saw the red lantern flickering in the distance and followed it. By morning, she was nowhere to be found. The only thing left behind were her footprints disappearing at the edge of the forest. Emily's father, Thomas, was devastated. Refusing to believe in ghost stories, he decided to search for his daughter himself. With a blazing torch in hand, Thomas ventured deep into the dark woods. Hours passed, but there was no sign of Emily. Then suddenly, a red glow emerged from the darkness. Thomas ran toward it. But when he reached the light, Emily was not there. Instead, a tall figure in a black cloak stood before him. His face was hidden beneath a rusted metal mask. In his hand, he held up an oil lantern, its eerie red light pulsing like a heartbeat. The Lantern Keeper. "Give me back my daughter," Thomas shouted, raising his torch. But the Lantern Keeper said nothing. He simply lifted the lantern higher. The moment the red light touched him, Thomas saw something horrifying. Hundreds, maybe thousands of ghostly figures floated in the air, their faces twisted, their eyes hollow, all consumed by the lantern's glow. And among them, Emily. She stood there, lifeless, as if she was no longer human. Thomas screamed, reaching for her, but his hands grasped nothing but air. "Emily, Emily!" But she only looked at him before slowly vanishing into the light. By morning, the villagers found Thomas's torch lying at the forest's edge, but he was nowhere to be found. That night, something terrifying happened. On the path leading into the forest, two red lanterns flickered in the darkness. One belonged to the lantern keeper, and the other to Thomas. The curse lives on. In a small village nestled at the edge of a dark forest, the people lived in constant fear. No one dared to step outside after sunset, for that was when the lantern keeper appeared. He was neither fully human nor a ghost. A mysterious entity draped in a black cloak, his face concealed behind a rusted iron mask, and in his hand, he carried an old oil lantern that glowed with an eerie red light. Anyone who saw that lantern and followed it was never seen again. The elders told a chilling tale. Hundreds of years ago, a ruthless prison warden ruled these lands. He delighted in tormenting prisoners, torturing them to death without a second thought. When he died, his soul was not freed but cursed to wander in darkness for eternity, forever hunting for lost souls. The villagers had tried to drive him away. They carried charms, lit massive bonfires to keep him at bay. But the red lantern always returned, flickering in the night as if he had never left. Then one day, a young man named Marcus decided to do what no one else dared: find the truth. He didn't believe in the legend, dismissing it as superstition. On a cold, moonlit night, Marcus took a torch and entered the forest where the red glow was often seen. Step by step, the thick darkness swallowed him. The distant hoot of an owl echoed through the trees, and the wind howled between the bare branches. But Marcus pressed on. Then he saw it, a red light flickering deep in the woods. Marcus moved closer. With every step, the air grew colder, sending chills down his spine. A foul stench of rusted metal and decaying flesh filled his nostrils. Then he saw him. The lantern keeper stood right before him, a towering figure cloaked in black, his rusted mask hiding any trace of humanity. The eyes behind the mask were empty, like two endless voids. Slowly, he lifted the lantern. The red light touched Marcus. At that moment, a horrifying vision flashed before his eyes. Hundreds of souls, their faces twisted in agony, their hollow eyes lifeless, floated in the darkness. Their hands reached for him, their mouths open wide as if screaming, yet no sound came out. Panic surged through Marcus. He turned to run, but his feet would not move. An unseen force held him in place, as if shackles bound him to the ground. He tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed by the void. The lantern keeper stepped forward, his glowing lantern burning brighter. The red light enveloped Marcus. That night, Marcus never returned. By morning, the villagers found his half-burned torch lying at the forest's edge. From that night on, whenever darkness fell, two red lanterns flickered in the distance. One belonged to the lantern keeper, and one to Marcus. The curse had never ended. For generations, the villagers of a small town near the forest had whispered about a terrifying curse. Every night, a red lantern would appear deep in the woods, flickering like a deadly invitation. It was said that anyone who followed the light would never return. One fateful winter night, a young boy named Elias noticed the eerie glow from his bedroom window. Unlike the others, Elias never believed in ghost stories. To him, they were just tales meant to scare children into behaving. So despite all the warnings, Elias quietly slipped out of his house, trudging through the snow-covered paths, and entered the forest. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. The wind howled through the bare branches, creating unsettling whispers. Beneath his feet, the snow darkened, as if tainted by something unseen. Then he saw it. A tall figure, draped in a black cloak, its face hidden behind a rusted metal mask. In its hand, it held a glowing red lantern, floating unnaturally in the darkness, radiating an otherworldly light. The lantern keeper. Slowly, the figure raised the lantern higher. Elias felt an invisible force pulling him closer, as if something was compelling him to step forward. But the moment the red light touched his eyes, A horrifying vision unfolded. Hundreds of souls drifted in the darkness, their faces twisted in agony, their empty eyes void of life. Their hands reached toward him, mouths open in silent screams, and among them, his mother. She stood there, pain in her eyes, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak. "Mom!" Elias cried, but his voice was swallowed by the cold emptiness around him. He tried to run toward her, but his feet were frozen in place. The cloaked figure moved closer, the red lantern in its grasp glowing brighter than ever. Elias felt the darkness consuming him. A violent gust of wind surged through the trees, howling like the sorrowful cries of countless trapped souls. Then, all was silent. The next morning, Elias was gone. The only thing left behind were his footprints in the snow, vanishing at the edge of the forest. From that night on, the villagers saw not just one, but two red lanterns flickering deep within the cursed woods. They say one of them belongs to Elias, and ever since that night, the curse has only continued to spread. The village of Ravenshade sat on the edge of a dense forest, where fear ruled the nights. No one dared to step outside after sunset because when darkness fell, a strange whispering sound echoed from deep within the woods. People believed it was the voice of the Lantern Keeper, a mysterious entity that wandered through the night carrying a glowing red lantern. Anyone who heard the whispers and did not run away immediately was never seen again. For generations, the villagers had tried to uncover the origins of this curse, but everyone who ventured into the forest to investigate disappeared. The only thing ever left behind was the eerie flicker of a red light in the distance. The elders spoke of a grim history. Centuries ago, the land was home to a secret prison, ruled by a cruel warden who tortured and burned countless prisoners alive using an oil lantern. When he died, the spirits of his victims did not rest. Instead, they formed a never-ending curse. And from that curse, the Lantern Keeper was born, a hunter of souls lurking in the darkness. One night, a young man named Lucas decided to face the legend head-on. He refused to believe in ghosts. Armed with a knife and a flashlight, Lucas stepped into the forbidden forest. The wind howled through the trees, making eerie sounds that sent shivers down his spine. The deeper he went, the thicker the darkness became. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. Then he heard it, the whispering. Lucas froze, straining to listen. The voice was faint, like a soft murmur floating through the air, unearthly and chilling. He swung his flashlight around. Nothing. But then, as the beam passed a nearby tree, Lucas's blood ran cold. Standing just beyond the tree was a tall, cloaked figure. Its face was hidden behind a rusted metal mask, and in its hand, it held a red lantern, glowing with an unnatural flickering light. The Lantern Keeper. Slowly, it raised the lantern higher. The moment the red light touched Lucas, a horrifying vision engulfed him. Countless souls, their faces twisted in agony, drifted in the darkness. Their hollow eyes stared at him, their mouths open in silent screams. Then, one of them stepped closer, a man with charred skin and empty sockets where his eyes should have been. His mouth moved, and Lucas realized the whispers were coming from him. A wave of ice-cold fear gripped Lucas. He tried to turn and run, but his legs would not obey. The cloaked figure took a step forward, and the red lantern in its grasp burned even brighter. Lucas opened his mouth to scream, but the darkness swallowed him whole. By morning, Lucas was gone. The villagers searched for him, but all they found were his footprints leading into the forest, disappearing into the snow. That night, those who dared to look toward the woods saw not just one, but two red lanterns flickering in the shadows. One belonged to the Lantern Keeper, and one to Lucas. The curse had claimed another soul. Story 2. The Curse of the Bone Queen. Deep within ancient, dust-covered tomes, whispers of a lost kingdom still linger, a realm consumed by darkness, where death and hatred reign. At its center, seated upon a throne of ivory bones, the Bone Queen rules in eternal coldness. She was once Countess Isolde von Renora, the most beautiful and powerful woman of her time. But beauty was never enough to satisfy her insatiable greed. She refused to age, refused to die. When war came to her kingdom, Isolde sought a way to protect her throne forever. She summoned a being from the shadows, death itself. "I will grant you immortality," the entity whispered. "But the price is your soul forever cursed. You will no longer be human." Isolde did not hesitate. She accepted the deal, and in an instant, her flesh decayed, her eyes hollowed into empty pits, leaving behind only a skeletal figure draped in a gown woven from shadows. The people of her kingdom fled in terror, but none could escape. The curse consumed the entire land, transforming those loyal to her into undead warriors, doomed to wander in eternal darkness. Centuries passed, and the world forgot the cursed kingdom, until a young knight named Alden, known for his greed and lust for power, sought the long-lost treasures hidden within the ruins of Isolde's castle. With a silver sword in hand, Alden stepped into the cold, desolate hall. Flickering ghostly flames cast eerie shadows across the carved stone walls. In the center of the room stood the bone throne, and upon it, a cloaked figure slowly stirred. "The Bone Queen," Alden whispered, eyes gleaming with hunger. Isolde rose, her voice echoing from the void. "Do you come seeking power, or do you challenge death itself?" Alden smirked, drawing his sword. "I've come to end you and claim your treasure." The Bone Queen laughed, the sound a haunting wail of 1,000 lost souls. "You think you can kill death?" With a single motion of her hand, shadows twisted and writhed as skeletal warriors emerged from the darkness, hundreds of them, closing in on Alden. He swung his sword, but each strike passed through empty air as if the very essence of death mocked him. Then he felt it. Something was wrong. His hands trembled, his skin dried and cracked, flaking away like ashes caught in an invisible fire. Alden screamed, but it was too late. In mere moments, his flesh was gone, leaving only bones behind, his once bright eyes now hollow and empty, like the countless others before him. He had become part of the Bone Queen's undead army, and so the curse lingers, waiting for the next fool who dares to step into the realm of darkness. On the night of the blood moon, when the sky glows red like an open wound, the gate between worlds cracks open. A chilling wind sweeps across the desolate fields, carrying the whispers of cursed souls. It is the night when the Bone Queen and her legion rise from the underworld, hunting for the fools who dare to defy death. Legends say that anyone who hears the eerie clatter of footsteps in the dead of night has no escape. Skeletons clad in black armor, their hollow eyes glowing under the moonlight, march in perfect formation, led by a shadow draped in a tattered black cloak. The Bone Queen, with a broken crown atop her skull, her fingers long and sharp like talons, speaks in a voice that echoes through the void. "Surrender your soul, or become one of my own." The greedy, the deceitful, those who crave power beyond their mortal reach, are drawn to the promise of dark magic. But once the bargain is made, there is no turning back. Elias was a young alchemist obsessed with the mysteries of life and death. For years, he had studied the legend of the Bone Queen, convinced that if he could unlock the secret of her power, He would never fear aging or mortality. On the night of the blood moon, Elias stood before the ruins of an ancient temple, the only gateway to the cursed kingdom. His heart pounded as the massive stone doors creaked open, revealing a vast hall dimly lit by eerie blue flames. Countless skeletal remains littered the cold floor, whispering silent warnings to those who entered. And there, upon a throne of ivory bones, a figure slowly stirred. Have you come to beg for power, or to face judgment? The voice echoed through the chamber, cold enough to freeze the very blood in Elias's veins. But he did not flinch. He lifted his chin, his voice filled with arrogance. I have come to learn your secrets. Grant me immortality. The Bone Queen rose, her tattered cloak shifting like the shadows of 100 tormented souls. Her hollow eyes bore into him, and then she smiled, a haunting, bone-chilling grin. Then immortality you shall have. A freezing wind howled through the temple, and in an instant, Elias felt his body begin to change. His skin shriveled, his flesh drained of life. He gasped, screaming in agony, but within moments his voice faded into silence. He looked down at his hands. Only bone remained. He had gained the immortality he so desperately sought, but not as a great and powerful being, only as a mindless warrior in the Bone Queen's undead army. The Bone Queen turned away, her cloak billowing behind her, and as she marched forward, a new skeleton fell in line with her eternal legion, forever cursed, forever lost. Since ancient times, deep within a forgotten forest, there lay an ancient sanctuary untouched by light. Its ruins were shrouded in thick mist, where whispers of lost souls echoed through the past. This was the gateway to the domain of the Bone Queen, the ruler of the afterlife, the one who granted immortality at the highest cost. Legend spoke of a ritual that took place every 100 years on the night of the blood moon. On this night, the sanctuary would open its doors to one ambitious soul, one foolish enough to challenge death itself, but none who entered had ever returned. Alden, a knight infamous for his greed and lust for power, had heard tales of the Shadow Sanctuary. He scoffed at the legends, believing that if he could slay the Bone Queen, he would claim her power and surpass all kings. On the night of the blood moon, he stepped through the massive stone gates of the sanctuary. The air inside was deathly cold, and the walls were covered in carvings depicting tormented souls. Blue flames flickered in eerie silence, casting a dim glow upon a throne made of ivory bones. Upon it, a cloaked figure slowly stirred. Do you come seeking power, or to face judgment? The Bone Queen's voice echoed like the wails of 100 lost souls. But Alden did not falter. He drew his sword, his eyes burning with arrogance. I have come to end you. Surrender your power to me. The Bone Queen laughed, a chilling sound like rusted chains scraping against stone. End me? Do you truly believe you can kill death? With a single motion of her hand, the shadows in the room coiled and twisted, forming an army of the damned. Skeletons clad in the armor of warriors long past rose from the darkness. Though fleshless, their weapons gleamed as if they had never aged. Their hollow eyes glowed with a spectral light as they encircled Alden. He swung his sword, but each strike passed through empty air. No enemy fell, no warrior crumbled. Then, he felt it. A shudder ran through his body, his breath grew heavy. His skin cracked and withered, turning to dust before his eyes. An unbearable pain spread through him as his flesh dissolved, drained of life itself. Alden screamed, but it was too late. Within moments, nothing remained of him but a skeleton. His once proud eyes were now empty sockets, like those of the warriors surrounding him. His sword fell to the ground with a hollow clang, and the undead soldiers let out a low, eerie moan, a solemn welcome to their newest recruit. The Bone Queen turned away, her cloak billowing behind her as she strode forward. And behind her, another skeleton fell into formation, a warrior bound to the curse, forever marching in death's eternal army. And the sanctuary remains, waiting for the next fool who dares to enter. In the ancient kingdom of Viridian, where war and ambition had turned men into monsters, a terrifying prophecy was passed down through generations. It was said that on the night of the blood moon, the Bone Queen would rise, bringing judgment upon the greedy, the treacherous, and the bloodthirsty. She was not just death itself. She was the balance of justice in the afterlife. No one knew who she once was, but every time she appeared, a kingdom would fall, and her army of the dead would grow. King Hadrian of Viridian was a tyrant. To secure his throne, he was willing to slaughter even the innocent. His endless greed led him to a reckless decision: to desecrate the ancient tombs of a lost dynasty in search of legendary treasures. His most loyal men, though terrified, obeyed his orders and dug deep into the cursed ruins. And on the night of the blood moon, when the ancient stones were broken apart, a chilling wind swept through Viridian, swallowing the entire castle in an eerie silence. Hadrian felt it. The entire kingdom felt it. From the darkness, footsteps echoed through the grand halls. Black cloaks dragged across the cold stone floors, and at the front of the procession stood a towering figure, the Bone Queen herself. He who has sown death shall now reap his own fate. The undead warriors rose from the depths of the earth, their hollow eyes glowing with a cold blue light. They surrounded the castle, sealing every exit. Hadrian panicked. He summoned his most powerful army, but one by one, they fell to the blades of those who had already perished centuries ago. In the end, only Hadrian remained. He trembled as he knelt before his throne, his sword slipping from his grasp. I can make amends. Can I be spared? The Bone Queen stepped closer, her empty eyes peering into the rotten soul of the man before her. A haunting smile crossed her skeletal face. No. Hadrian screamed as darkness consumed him. His skin shriveled, his blood turned to ice, and in an instant, his body crumbled into dust. And when the first light of dawn touched the ruined castle, Viridian's throne stood empty. Only a skeleton clad in royal robes remained, its hollow gaze staring into eternity. From that day forward, Viridian was no longer a kingdom of the living. It belonged to the dead. Deep within a cursed land, where even birds dared not sing, stood a long-forgotten castle. They called it the Hell Castle, the eternal domain of the Bone Queen. Every 100 years, on the night of the blood moon, its gates would open, waiting for a lost soul to step inside. The arrogant and the ambitious believed they could claim her power, but they did not know. Once they entered, they would never leave. Darian, a young and ambitious sorcerer, had spent his life studying the secrets of immortality. He believed that if he could steal the Bone Queen's power, he would become unstoppable, the master of both life and death. On the night of the blood moon, he arrived at Hell Castle. As he laid his hand upon the massive iron gate, it groaned open, revealing a long hallway illuminated by flickering blue torches. The air was icy cold, carrying the scent of ashes and ruin. At the end of the hall, a shadowy figure sat motionless upon a throne of white bone. Do you seek knowledge or judgment? The Bone Queen's voice was as cold as the breath of midnight. But Darian did not flinch. He lifted his chin, eyes burning with ambition. I have come to claim your power. I do not fear any god of death. The Bone Queen laughed, a haunting sound like chains dragging across stone. Then prove it. She raised a hand, and at once the shadows twisted and took form. An army of skeletal warriors awaited her command. Darian's hands trembled as he summoned his magic. Bolts of lightning shot from his fingers, but the undead warriors did not falter. They rushed forward, their weapons passing through his magical shields as if they were mere illusions. Panic seized him. He turned to flee, but the entrance had vanished. He shouted his most powerful spells, but nothing could stop death itself. Then, he felt it. His body began to wither, his skin turning gray, his hands growing brittle. Pieces of flesh fell away like autumn leaves. The light in his eyes faded until only hollow sockets remained. And in the end, all that stood was a skeleton draped in a tattered sorcerer's robe, silent, soulless, empty. The Bone Queen rose from her throne. Welcome to my eternal army. And so, Hell Castle had claimed another servant, and it would continue to wait for the next guest. Story 3. The Laugh in the Night. The rain poured heavily, draping the empty streets in a chilling mist. The streetlights flickered weakly, swallowed by the darkness. The city at night always had an eerie presence, but tonight, it was unnaturally silent. Ethan pulled his coat tighter and quickened his pace. He wasn't someone who scared easily, but the recent rumors about a mysterious killer had made the air feel heavy. Laugh before it's too late. That was the message found at every crime scene. All the victims had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only those words written in blood. No one knew who the killer was, only that he appeared in the darkness, always with a twisted smile. Ethan scoffed. Just rumors. Only weak-minded fools believed in such nonsense. But then, he realized something. No cars, no footsteps, not even the sound of the rain seemed real anymore. And then, he heard it. A laugh. At first, it was barely a whisper, like the wind brushing past his ears. But then it grew louder, warped, and distorted. A laugh that had no trace of humanity. Ethan turned around. Under the dim glow of the flickering streetlight, a figure stood in the distance. A man in a black hooded cloak, his face shrouded in shadow. But his eyes, they burned a fiery red, glowing in the darkness. And as he tilted his head up, Ethan felt his blood turn to ice. That smile. A smile stretched far beyond what was humanly possible, revealing rows of yellowed, razor-sharp teeth stained with blood. Black streaks ran down from his hollow eyes, making his face look even more twisted and monstrous. Ethan stumbled back, trying to stay calm. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. He just stood there, rain dripping from his hood, the same horrifying grin frozen on his face. Then he took a step forward. Panic shot through Ethan's body. He turned and ran. He sprinted through the dark alleys, his breath ragged, his heart pounding in terror. But the laughter, it followed him. Closer, louder. He turned down another street, desperate to escape. And then, he froze. The figure was already there, waiting. He hadn't moved. He hadn't chased after him. He was just standing there watching Ethan, and smiling. Ethan's hands trembled as he covered his mouth, trying to hold back a scream. Laugh. The distorted voice echoed through the night. Before it's too late. And then, everything went black. The laughter was the last thing to fade, stretching endlessly into the darkness. And just like the others before him, Ethan disappeared. The rain poured down, icy droplets splattering against the worn cobblestone streets, reflecting the dim glow of the flickering streetlights. The city seemed swallowed by an endless darkness, silent except for the relentless patter of the rain. David pulled his coat tighter, quickening his steps through the deserted streets. He hated walking home this late, especially with the growing rumors of a serial killer spreading fear throughout the city. Laugh before it's too late. That chilling message, written in blood, was found at every crime scene. No one knew who the killer was. The only certainty was that those who encountered him were never seen again. David shook his head, trying to push the unsettling thoughts away. But then he noticed something strange. Everything was too quiet. He stopped in his tracks. No rain, no wind, no sound at all. Only an eerie, suffocating silence. And then he heard it. A laugh. At first it was soft, distant, like an echo from far away. But within seconds, it grew louder, more distorted, twisting into something unnatural and inhuman. David turned around. A shadowy figure stood beneath the flickering streetlight. Draped in a long black cloak, its face was hidden beneath a hood. But it couldn't conceal those glowing red eyes, staring straight at him. As the figure tilted its head upward, David felt his blood turn to ice. A twisted smile stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth stained with blood. David stumbled back, his heartbeat hammering against his chest. Who are you?" His voice trembled. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there and laughed. That chilling laughter echoed through the night, sending shivers down David's spine. Then it moved forward. David turned and ran. He sprinted through narrow alleys, his shoes splashing through puddles, but the laughter never faded. It followed him, closer, louder. He turned down another street, gasping for breath, his pulse pounding. But then, he froze. The figure was already there, waiting. It never needed to chase him. It never needed to run. It was always there. David's breath hitched as he stumbled backward, terror gripping his chest. "Laugh," the warped voice whispered, "before it's too late." His eyes widened as a suffocating darkness engulfed him. The laughter was the last thing to remain, stretching endlessly into the void. And just like all the others before him, David disappeared. The rain poured heavily, icy droplets shattering against the empty streets. The old streetlights flickered weakly, their dim glow failing to chase away the overwhelming darkness that consumed the city. Anna pulled her coat tightly around herself, the sharp clicks of her high heels echoing through the silent night. She hated working late, especially with the unsettling rumors of a strange killer spreading fear throughout the city. "Laugh before it's too late." The words written in blood appeared at every crime scene. No one knew the killer's identity. No one had ever seen his face. The only thing they knew for sure, every victim vanished without a trace. Anna didn't believe in those stories. They were just urban legends, exaggerated to scare the weak-hearted. But then, she noticed something unusual. Everything was too quiet. No more passing cars, no more raindrops hitting the pavement. Even the wind seemed to have been swallowed by the dense, suffocating darkness. And then, she heard it. A laugh. At first it was distant, barely a whisper carried through the air. But within moments it grew louder, distorted, inhuman. Anna swallowed hard and turned around. Under the flickering streetlight, a shadowy figure stood still. It was draped in a long black cloak, its face hidden within the hood. But its eyes, they glowed red, burning with an eerie, lifeless intensity. And when the figure lifted its head, Anna felt her entire body freeze in terror. A wide, unnatural grin stretched from ear to ear, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth, stained with blood. She stumbled backward, her heartbeat pounding violently against her chest. Who's there?" Her voice trembled. The figure didn't answer. It only stood there and laughed. That horrifying laughter echoed through the darkness, sending chills crawling up her spine. And then, it moved. Anna turned and ran. She sprinted through the streets, her heels slamming against the wet pavement. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her chest tight with panic. But the laughter, it never faded. It followed her, closer, louder. She turned sharply into a narrow alley, her clothes damp with sweat, her pulse racing. But then, she froze. The figure was already there, waiting. It never needed to chase her. It never needed to run. It had always been there. Anna's lips trembled as she staggered back, her breathing shallow. "Laugh," the hoarse voice whispered, "before it's too late." Her eyes widened in terror as the cold darkness swallowed her whole. The laughter echoed endlessly through the empty night. And then, just like all the others, Anna disappeared. James wandered down the empty street at midnight, his breath forming white mist in the freezing air. The city had long fallen into slumber, leaving only flickering streetlights and puddles reflecting the endless darkness. He didn't believe the rumors about the mysterious killer spreading terror everywhere. A man with a grotesque smile? A shadow that appeared before victims vanished without a trace? Ridiculous. But then, something strange happened. All sounds disappeared. No wind, no distant cars, no footsteps but his own. And then, a sound broke the silence. A laugh. At first it was faint, like a distant echo. But soon it grew louder, distorted, unnatural, almost inhuman. James turned around. Under the dim streetlight, a dark figure stood still. It wore a long black cloak, its hood hiding most of its face. But it couldn't hide its eyes. Two glowing red orbs, burning with an eerie light. And when the figure lifted its head, James felt a chill crawl down his spine. A wide, unnatural grin stretched across its face, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth stained with blood. James stumbled back, his heartbeat pounding violently. Who are you?" His voice cracked. The figure didn't answer. It only stood there and laughed. The laughter echoed through the night, unnervingly drawn out, making James's skin crawl. Then it took a step forward. James turned and ran. He sprinted through the alleys, his breath ragged, his feet splashing through icy puddles. But the laughter, it followed him, never fading, never slowing. He ducked into a narrow passage, pressing himself against the damp wall, trying to quiet his frantic breathing. Silence. Maybe it was gone. But then, James realized something. The laughter hadn't stopped. It was still there. Slowly, right next to his ear. He froze, paralyzed with fear. A low, distorted voice whispered, "Laugh, before it's too late." James's eyes widened in terror, his entire body trembling. And then, the darkness swallowed him whole. James was never seen again. Only the laughter remained, echoing through the night. Liam stepped into an antique shop tucked away in a narrow alley, where the dim evening light barely seeped through the dusty curtains. The wooden shelves, aged and worn, were filled with objects long forgotten, exuding a musty, unsettling scent. He wasn't sure why he felt drawn here. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe something unseen was pulling him deeper inside. Then his eyes landed on an old mirror in the corner. Its dark wooden frame was intricately carved, but the glass itself seemed off. It didn't reflect light normally. There was a faint, ghostly haze covering its surface. And then, Liam saw it. His own reflection, but not quite. The image in the mirror was slightly distorted, as if separated by an invisible barrier between two worlds. But what truly sent chills down his spine was the smile. His reflection was smiling. A wide, unnatural grin stretched across its face, reaching from ear to ear, revealing jagged yellowed teeth. Liam stumbled backward, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. "What the hell?" he muttered, but the reflection didn't change. It just stood there, smiling. A laugh echoed, not in the shop, but inside Liam's head. a distorted, piercing sound that made his skin crawl. Then, the figure in the mirror lifted its hand. But Liam didn't. A cold shiver ran down his spine. That wasn't him. The reflection tilted its head, its soulless black eyes locked onto him, the grin never fading. "Laugh," a whisper slithered through the air. "Before it's too late." Liam shook his head, ready to turn and run. But then, an ice-cold hand grabbed him from behind. His breath hitched as he stared at the mirror. His reflection was gone. Only endless darkness remained. And the sound of laughter echoing in the void. The next day, the antique shop was permanently closed. No one ever saw Liam again. The rain poured heavily on the empty street. The flickering streetlights cast weak, distorted reflections on the wet pavement. Jack quickened his pace, uneasy at the thought of the recent mysterious disappearances. Rumors had spread across the city about a killer no one had ever seen clearly. No one knew who he was, only that every victim who vanished left behind a single, chilling sign. A crooked, eerie smile crudely drawn on the nearest wall. Jack didn't believe the stories, but right now, as he walked past a dark alley, a strange sensation crawled up his spine. Everything suddenly became eerily silent. No more raindrops, no car engines, no footsteps but his own. Then, a sound broke through the silence. A laugh. At first, it was faint, like a breath being choked back. But within seconds, it grew distorted, stretching unnaturally, echoing through the night. Jack froze. He turned his head toward the end of the alley. Under the flickering streetlight, a dark figure stood still. A long coat draped over its thin frame. A hood obscured most of its face. But when it finally lifted its head, Jack felt his blood turn to ice. A grotesque grin stretched across its face, unnaturally wide, reaching its ears, exposing jagged yellowed teeth. It had no eyes, only two hollow, pitch-black sockets. But Jack could feel them staring right at him. He swallowed hard, stepping backward. Who's there?" His voice cracked. No response, only laughter, growing louder. Then the figure moved, but not like a normal person. It glided across the ground, its feet never touching the pavement. Jack turned and ran. He sprinted through the empty streets, his breath ragged, his heartbeat pounding against his ribs. But the laughter, it followed him, closer, louder. He darted into another alley, pressing himself against the damp wall, holding his breath. Silence. Maybe it was gone. But then, Jack realized something. The laughter had never stopped. It was right next to his ear. A whisper slithered through the air. "Laugh, before it's too late." Jack didn't have time to scream. The darkness swallowed him whole. The next day, the police found a wall in that alley. Scrawled across it in blood, a crooked, eerie smile. Jack was never seen again. Louder behind the door. Lisa lived alone in an old apartment on the outskirts of the city. Every night, she had a routine, checking the front door, locking the windows, and turning off all the lights before going to bed. But tonight, something felt off. Just as she was about to lie down, a faint sound came from the hallway outside her front door. Laughter. At first it was soft, as if someone was trying to stifle it. Lisa froze, her heartbeat quickening. She stepped closer to the door, pressing her ear against it. Click. The doorknob rattled slightly. Someone was standing out there. She swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was just a neighbor coming home late. But when she peeked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. No one was there. Yet the laughter persisted. She stumbled backward, a cold chill creeping up her spine. Lisa tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just her imagination. But as soon as she turned away, click, the doorknob shook more violently. The laughter was now right outside her door. Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears. She quickly bolted the lock and rushed into her bedroom, pulling the blanket over her head, trying to block it out. But just as she closed her eyes, knock, knock, knock. Someone was knocking on her bedroom door. She froze. She lived alone. Cold sweat dripped down her forehead. Trembling, she slowly pulled the blanket down, staring at her bedroom door. Silence. No more knocking, no more laughter, just an eerie, suffocating stillness. Maybe she was just exhausted and imagining things. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. But when she turned to the mirror, she saw it. A tall, thin figure stood behind her, its eyes hollow and black, its mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin reaching from ear to ear. Lisa opened her mouth to scream. The figure in the mirror smiled and whispered, "Laugh, before it's too late." Everything went black. The next morning, the neighbors called the police after Lisa never answered her door. When the officers broke in, the apartment was empty. All that remained was a mirror in her bedroom, and in it was the reflection of a crooked, eerie smile. Story 4. The Path with No Way Out. Liam drove along the deserted highway, the full moon hanging in the night sky. A cold wind blew past, carrying an eerie sense of unease. There were no streetlights here, just darkness and an endless stretch of trees. He didn't know why he had taken this road. He had planned to go home after a long, exhausting day, but somehow his hands on the wheel kept steering him farther away from the city. Then, suddenly, he stopped the car, for no reason at all. In front of him was a narrow trail leading into the forest. It wasn't on any map, yet somehow it felt strangely familiar. Liam stepped out of the car. He hadn't planned on entering, but his feet moved on their own, as if something inside the woods was calling him. And so, he walked in. The darkness inside the forest was far denser than outside. The moonlight barely touched the treetops, leaving the path below swallowed in shadow. The silence was unsettling. No insects, no birds, only the sound of his footsteps crunching against dry leaves, echoing in the empty woods. A sudden chill ran down his spine. He felt someone watching him. But when he turned around, the path behind him was completely empty. Nothing but darkness. His heart started pounding faster. He told himself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on him. But then he saw it. A figure. Far ahead, at the end of the trail, bathed in the moon's pale glow, stood a motionless figure. It didn't move. It had no clear face, just standing there, watching. Liam swallowed hard, a primal fear rising in his chest. He took a step back. The figure moved closer, not by walking. It just appeared nearer every time he blinked. Liam turned and ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get out. But no matter how far he ran, the path stretched endlessly ahead. He was still trapped in the forest. His heart pounded, his breath ragged. He glanced over his shoulder. The figure was right in front of him. This time, Liam saw it clearly. It wasn't human. It had no eyes, just a twisted grin stretching across its pale face. A whisper echoed through the night. "You've come this far. There's no leaving now." The moonlight vanished. Everything plunged into darkness. The next morning, Liam's car was found by the roadside. The engine was still running, the door left wide open. But Liam was gone. All that remained were footprints leading into the forest, then disappearing into nothingness. Liam jolted awake. He didn't remember when he had fallen asleep, nor did he know why he was here. Standing on a desolate forest path, bathed in the pale glow of the moon, The night wind whispered through the towering trees, rustling like the murmurs of wandering spirits. There were no insects, no birds, only endless silence. A shiver ran down Liam's spine. He tried to recall the last thing he had done. He remembered driving down the highway, and then everything went blank. When he opened his eyes, he was here. Something wasn't right. He took a step back, intending to retrace his path, but then he realized the road behind him was gone. There was no trace of an exit, only an abyss of darkness swallowing everything behind him. He was trapped. With no other choice, Liam forced himself to move forward. Each step echoed in the silence, as if the forest itself was watching him. In the distance, he saw a figure standing beneath the moonlight. His heart clenched. The figure stood motionless, its back facing him. Its clothes were tattered, hair draped over its shoulders, exuding an unnatural coldness. Liam hesitated. He didn't want to get closer, but standing still wasn't an option either. "Excuse me, do you know the way out of here?" His voice wavered slightly. The figure didn't respond. It remained still, as if it hadn't heard him at all. Liam swallowed hard and took a cautious step forward. But the moment he moved, the figure's head twisted violently backward, a pale, eyeless face, a grotesque grin stretching from ear to ear. Liam froze. Terror gripped him, his body trembling, but his legs refused to move. He was a prey ensnared in the hunter's gaze. "You shouldn't be here." A distorted voice rasped from the shadows. Liam screamed and turned to run. But there was no escape. He ran and ran, but the forest never ended. The wind howled, mocking him with laughter. The moonlight itself seemed to fade. Then suddenly, everything went black. A freezing breath brushed against his neck. It's too late. The next morning, an abandoned car was found by the roadside. The engine was still warm, the door left wide open, but Liam was gone. No trace of him remained, except for a trail of footprints leading into the forest. Stopping abruptly in the darkness, Liam drove down the empty road, the full moon hanging high in the sky, casting an eerie glow through the blackened trees. For some reason, an unsettling feeling crept over him. This road looked familiar. His heartbeat quickened. He was sure he had never been here before, yet every rock, every tree along the roadside felt strangely recognizable. Then suddenly, his engine died. No warning, no signs of failure. It just stopped. Liam frowned, turning the key in the ignition, but nothing happened. A cold breeze swept past him, carrying a damp, musty scent, and something else, rotting. He opened the car door, intending to check the engine, but the moment he stepped out, an eerie sensation washed over him. Someone was watching him. Slowly, he turned around. Far down the road, beneath the moonlight, a shadowy figure stood motionless. The darkness obscured its face, but Liam knew it was staring at him. Not wanting to stay in one place for too long, Liam decided to walk down the road, hoping to find help. But no matter how far he went, the figure remained in place, unmoving, unresponsive, as if it wasn't truly there. Liam swallowed hard, his hand brushing against his neck, where a cold shiver trailed down his spine. Just then, the figure began to move. Not by walking, but by gliding toward him. It had no legs, no weight, just a dark presence sliding across the ground. Liam stepped back, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. But the road behind him was gone. In its place was now an endless forest with no way out. Liam turned and ran, but the road stretched on forever. No matter how fast he moved, the figure only drew closer. A whisper floated through the wind. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was distorted, fragmented, as if echoing from the depths of hell. Liam screamed, but no one could hear him. Then the moonlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, locals discovered an abandoned car by the roadside. The door was left wide open, the engine still intact, but its owner was nowhere to be found. Only a single trail of footprints remained, leading into the forest and stopping abruptly in the endless void of night. Liam woke up in the middle of a dark forest. A cold breeze brushed against his skin, carrying the damp scent of earth and decaying leaves. He had no memory of how he got there. The last thing he remembered was driving down an empty road, and then nothing. He looked up. Beyond the towering black trees, the full moon hung in the sky, casting a dim glow over the rocky path ahead. No sound of insects, no rustling of leaves, only dead silence. Liam stood up, scanning his surroundings. The forest was dense, the towering trees forming a prison around him. There was no clear way out, but the narrow path beneath the moonlight seemed to lead somewhere. He had no choice but to follow it. And the further he walked, the heavier the air became. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. With each step, the sensation grew stronger, like a presence creeping closer. He stopped. Up ahead, through the thin mist, stood a figure, a woman in a white dress, her long hair covering her face. She stood motionless in the middle of the path, bathed in silver moonlight. Liam hesitated. "Do you need help?" His voice was hoarse. No response. She just stood there, completely silent. Liam took a step back, his heartbeat pounding. Then, the woman suddenly lifted her head. Her eyes were hollow, black voids with no end, and her lips twisted into an unnaturally wide grin. Liam's body froze. She began moving, not walking, but gliding toward him. Her bony hands reached out. A distorted voice echoed through the air. "You cannot leave this place." Liam screamed and turned to run, but the path had vanished. All around him was nothing but endless forest, the twisted trees looming like monstrous hands, reaching to drag him into the abyss. A raspy laugh echoed through the wind. The moonlight dimmed. Darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, people found Liam's car abandoned by the roadside. The engine was still running. The door was still open. But Liam was gone. Only a trail of footprints remained, leading into the forest, stopping right where the moonlight had disappeared. Liam drove through the silent night. The full moon hung high, casting a cold glow over the winding road. Outside his window, dense trees lined the roadside, their bare branches reaching out like skeletal hands from the darkness. He had no idea how long he had been driving. Everything looked exactly the same. The curving road, the barren trees, the moon frozen in the sky. Something felt wrong. Liam glanced at the clock on his dashboard. The hands weren't moving. His chest tightened. He tried to stay calm, but a terrifying thought crept into his mind. He was trapped, not on a normal road, but in an endless loop with no escape. He decided to stop the car. But the moment he stepped out, an icy wind swept past him, carrying the stench of blood. Liam froze. Far down the road, lying motionless on the ground, was something. His heartbeat pounded as he cautiously approached. A body. And the most horrifying part? It was him. Liam staggered back, his breath hitching as he stared at his own lifeless form. His dead eyes were wide open, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. Number, this couldn't be real. Panic surged through him as he spun around and sprinted back to his car. He had to leave, now. But when he flung open the driver's side door, his blood ran cold. The seat wasn't empty. Someone else was already sitting there. Himself. His doppelganger turned slowly, his hollow eyes meeting Liam's. A distorted grin stretched across his face. A deep, guttural voice echoed, "It's your turn now." And then, darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, an abandoned car was found by the roadside. No signs of an accident, no trace of the driver, only a shattered mirror on the dashboard, reflecting the image of a faceless man. Liam drove through the darkness, following a narrow road leading to a small house deep in the forest. A storm was approaching, and he needed a place to take shelter. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but the faint glow from the house's window gave him a sliver of hope. He stepped out of the car, walked up to the door, and knocked gently. Knock, knock, knock. No response. Liam hesitated, then tried the doorknob. It wasn't locked. He pushed the door open. The air inside was cold and stale, but at least it was a place to stay. The room was sparsely furnished, an old table, a few chairs, and an unlit fireplace. It looked abandoned. Then, something on the wall caught his eye. A framed photograph of a family of 3, a man, a woman, and a small boy. But something was wrong. When Liam looked closer, he realized all their eyes had been scratched out. A chill crawled down his spine. Just then, a knock echoed through the house. Knock, knock, knock. Liam froze. He was sure he was alone. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. When he opened the door, no one was there. Only the endless darkness of the forest and the sound of the wind whispering through the trees. Liam swallowed hard and shut the door. But the moment he turned around, knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder. His heartbeat thundered in his chest. He didn't dare open the door again. He just backed away, eyes locked on the wooden frame. Then, in a split second, a voice whispered right behind him. "Why won't you open the door?" Liam spun around, but before he could see anything, darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, Liam's car was found parked right in front of the abandoned house. The door remained shut, but on the wood, there were 3 long scratch marks, as if left by human fingers. Liam was never seen again. Story 5. The Chained Soul. Deep within the cursed forest, where no one dared to step foot, a tormented entity had been imprisoned for centuries. They called it the Chained Soul, the spirit of a traitor, forever cursed, never able to find peace. Long ago, he had been a mighty warrior, fighting under the banner of a powerful kingdom. But greed and the thirst for power led him to betray his comrades, selling his soul to dark forces in exchange for unrivaled strength. He slaughtered his lord, spread death across the battlefield. But in the end, those who had given him power were the ones who cursed him. They bound his soul with enchanted chains, condemning him to eternal torment in the shadows of the cursed forest. From that moment on, he became a monstrous being. His eyes burned like embers, his long, tangled hair whipped through the wind, and his ashen skin bore the scars of searing chains that never let him go. He could not leave the forest, could not die, and could never escape his endless suffering. Anyone who wandered into the forest never returned. People whispered that on nights when the moon was shrouded in mist, one could hear the eerie clanking of chains and the mournful wails of the damned. Lost souls, trespassers who dared to step into his domain, were ensnared by his living chains, dragged into an abyss from which there was no escape. But one night, a stranger entered the forest. He was different from the others. He showed no fear. Cloaked in black, he carried an ancient pendant engraved with mysterious symbols. His piercing gaze held a dangerous confidence as he ventured deep into the forbidden woods. The chained soul sensed his presence and let out a guttural growl. The chains around him rattled violently, coiling like serpents ready to strike. "Who are you?" His voice echoed like a whisper from the grave. The stranger simply smirked, unshaken. "You've been waiting for me, haven't you?" The chained soul lunged, his chain slicing through the air, ready to tear the intruder apart. But the moment they touched the stranger's pendant, a surge of dark energy erupted. The chains instantly lost their power, breaking apart, crumbling into dust. For the first time in centuries, the chained soul felt freedom. He looked down at his hands. No more chains binding him, no more flames consuming his flesh. He was free. But then, the stranger's deep, menacing laugh filled the air. "Now, you belong to me." A chilling realization struck the chained soul. He hadn't been saved. He had merely exchanged one set of chains for another. An invisible, more sinister force had taken hold of him. He was no longer a prisoner of the forest, but now he was a slave to the stranger. That night, the cursed forest was no longer haunted by just one tormented soul. It had a new master, and the nightmare was only just beginning. This forest had no name. The villagers simply called it the Dead Woods, a desolate and eerie place where no one dared to tread. Because they knew, anyone who entered never returned. Rumors spoke of a cursed entity deep within the forest, a tormented spirit bound by hellish chains. He had once been a great warrior, but his greed and betrayal led him to a terrible fate. To gain eternal power, he had sold his soul to demons. Yet those who had granted him his strength had no intention of letting him live freely. They bound him with enchanted chains, trapping him in endless agony. Every night, the villagers could hear the clanking of chains, echoing like a call from the underworld. Those who were foolish or curious enough to step into the forest never came back. Some claimed to have seen burning red eyes in the darkness, a gaunt yet terrifying figure with a jagged grin that seemed ready to devour their very souls. That night, Edwin became the next to enter the forest. He was a bounty hunter, a man who didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He had heard the stories but dismissed them as the superstitions of frightened villagers. Wealthy merchants had offered a hefty reward to anyone who could bring back proof of the chained soul's existence. And Edwin never turned down a challenge. He moved through the darkness, his torch barely illuminating the twisted trees around him. The air was unnaturally thick and cold, even though summer's heat still lingered outside the forest's edge. The dead branches stretched like skeletal fingers, as if trying to pull him back. Then, he heard it. Clank. Edwin froze. Chains? He scanned the shadows, his grip tightening around the hilt of his dagger. Clank. Clank. The sound grew closer. A chilling breath of wind brushed against his neck, sending a shiver down his spine. And then, a voice. Low and hollow. "You shouldn't be here." Edwin spun around. Standing before him was a monstrous figure. Its skin was a sickly shade of gray-blue, its long, matted hair like strands of ash. Its eyes burned like embers, and heavy chains coiled around its body, writhing like living serpents. Edwin's breath caught in his throat. It was real. But before he could react, the chains lashed out, striking like a whip. Edwin dove to the side, narrowly avoiding their grasp. He drew his dagger and slashed at a chain that snaked toward his leg. The blade bounced off, as if he had struck solid iron. "Run, before it's too late," the voice rasped. But beneath the threat, Edwin sensed something else. A warning. He made a fatal mistake. He didn't run. Instead, he pulled out a charm, an old talisman given to him by a mysterious sorcerer before he left for the forest. "This will bind him," the sorcerer had claimed. Edwin raised the talisman and muttered the incantation. A brilliant blue light erupted, enveloping the chained soul. It howled in pain as the chains around its body constricted, seemingly trying to suppress its very existence. But then, it looked at Edwin. "You don't understand." A twisted smile crept across its face, and in an instant the chains turned, no longer restraining the creature but lunging straight for Edwin. He had no time to react. Pain tore through his body as the chains wrapped around him, piercing his skin, dragging him down into the abyss. He could feel his soul being ripped apart, swallowed by an endless void. Just before he was consumed entirely, he heard the final whisper. "The curse needs a replacement." And then, nothing. The next morning, the villagers saw a lone figure standing at the edge of the cursed forest. Gaunt, bound in chains, with eyes burning red like dying embers. But it was no longer the chained soul of legend. It was someone newly cursed. This forest was cursed. No one dared to go near it, and no one challenged the ancient curse that had existed for centuries. But one man did not believe in legends. His name was Ronan, a soul hunter, a man who tracked down supernatural entities in exchange for hefty bounties. The villagers spoke of a monstrous entity trapped deep within the woods. They called it the Chained Soul, a traitorous spirit, eternally bound in torment. Its chains clanked in the dead of night, luring in unfortunate souls. Ronan scoffed at their stories. "Just another wandering spirit. I've hunted demons and vampires. What's a chained ghost compared to them?" With a silver sword strapped to his waist and a sealing talisman in his hand, he stepped into the cursed forest. The air was unnaturally cold. A thick fog shrouded the trees, and their twisted branches stretched like skeletal fingers toward Ronan. But he wasn't afraid. Then he heard it. Clank. Clank. He stopped, his eyes scanning the darkness. A chill crept down his spine as a ghostly whisper echoed through the night. "Why have you come?" Ronan tightened his grip on his sword, and from the shadows, it appeared. A towering, gaunt figure with sickly gray-blue skin. Its burning red eyes gleamed like embers, and its long, tangled hair flowed as if caught in an invisible wind. Blackened chains coiled around its body, glowing faintly with an eerie light. "The Chained Soul," Ronan muttered. But fear wasn't what he felt. It was excitement. "You're nothing but a cursed spirit. I'm here to capture you." The Chained Soul tilted its head slightly. "You think you can capture me?" Before Ronan could reply, the chains lashed out. He leaped back, swinging his sword, but the blade sliced through empty air. The chains shot forward again, wrapping around his arm with crushing force. Gritting his teeth, Ronan pulled out his sealing talisman and slammed it onto the Chained Soul's chest. A burst of blue light erupted, forcing the spirit backward. "So, you do have a weakness." Ronan smirked, but the Chained Soul smiled back. "You don't understand." Suddenly, the light from the talisman flickered and died. The chains trembled violently. Then, without warning, they lunged straight for Ronan. He had no time to react. The chains wrapped around his throat, arms, and legs, tightening like a vice. He struggled, but the more he fought, the stronger they held him. "What the hell?" he roared. The Chained Soul slowly stepped forward, staring at him with hollow eyes. "You thought I was prey. No, Ronan. I am the hunter." It raised a hand, and in an instant, Ronan felt his very soul being pulled from his body. He screamed, but no one could hear him. His form flickered, his body fading into shadow. He looked down, horrified. The chains now belonged to him. The Chained Soul turned and vanished into the darkness. The curse always needs a replacement. And just like that, Ronan became the new Chained Soul. From that night on, the sound of clanking chains continued to echo through the forest. But this time, the cursed spirit was no longer the same. It was a hunter turned prey. This forest had no name. The villagers only called it the Forest of Death. No one dared to step inside because anyone who entered never returned. They spoke of a ghostly entity lurking in the woods, the chained soul, a cursed spirit forever bound in the shackles of the underworld. No one knew who it once was, only that every night the sound of rattling chains echoed through the darkness, calling out to the unfortunate souls who wandered too close. But tonight, someone stepped into the forest, not out of curiosity, out of revenge. His name was Darius. He did not believe in gods, nor did he fear curses, but he believed in pain, the kind that had burned inside him for years. Years ago, his sister, Lena, vanished in this very forest. He had searched desperately but found nothing. All he heard were the same chilling whispers. The chained soul took her. No one tried to save her. No one dared to challenge the creature. Darius never forgave their cowardice. He had spent years studying dark magic, honing his body and mind. And now, he had returned to this forest to end the nightmare once and for all. The night was thick with shadows. The trees twisted and groaned, their skeletal branches stretching toward the sky. A cold mist wrapped around Darius like a deathly embrace. And then he heard it. Clank, clank. The chains. A raspy voice echoed from the darkness. "Have you come seeking death?" Darius unsheathed his cursed blade, its surface glowing faintly with violet light. "I came for you." From the depths of the shadows it emerged. A towering figure, its skin ashen and lifeless. Long, ghostly hair flowed like smoke, and its burning crimson eyes pierced through the darkness. Thick, blackened chains slithered across the ground, hungry and restless. Darius didn't flinch. "Give me back my sister," he snarled. The chained soul tilted its head. "Your sister?" Suddenly, a faint voice echoed through the trees. "Brother, Darius." His heart stopped. Lena stood there, but she was no longer the girl he once knew. Her skin was pale, her eyes hollow. Shackles clung to her wrists, the chains dragging heavily along the ground. She was no longer just his sister. She was a part of the curse. Darius clenched his teeth, fury boiling inside him. "What have you done to her?" The chained soul only smiled. "I did nothing. The curse chose her." The chains suddenly lashed out. Darius reacted instantly, slicing through the air with his blade. A surge of violet light erupted, tearing through the shadows. For a moment, he thought he had won. But then, the chained soul whispered, "Do you truly believe you can free her?" A scream rang out. Lena cried out in pain as the chains tightened around her, pulling her into the earth. "No." Darius lunged forward, but it was too late. She vanished into the darkness. His eyes burned with rage as he turned back to the creature. "I'll kill you." Summoning all his strength, he charged. His blade gleamed as he swung with everything he had. But the chained soul did not move. It simply smiled. "Do you really think I am your enemy?" Before Darius could process those words, the chains wrapped around him. A searing pain tore through his body. His strength drained, his vision blurred. He could hear Lena's voice again. But this time, it wasn't a cry for help. "I'm sorry, but someone must take my place." Darius froze, and then he understood. The curse could never be broken, only passed on. He let out one final scream, but it was already over. When the night fell once more, the sound of rattling chains echoed from the depths of the forest. But the chained soul was no longer the same. Now, it was Darius. No way out. This village was once peaceful, but then the mysterious deaths began. No one knew the cause, only that every victim disappeared into the northern forest, a place no one dared to enter. The villagers whispered of a terrifying entity, the chained soul, a spirit that was neither dead nor alive, doomed to hunt those who stepped into its domain. But there was one man in the village who did not fear the curse. His name was Ethan, and he did not believe in ghosts. There had to be a logical explanation for these deaths, and he was going to find it. Ethan carried a silver knife and a few protective charms. They might be useless, but at least they made him feel safer. As soon as he entered the forest, he noticed something was wrong. Too quiet. No insects, no rustling leaves, no sound except for his own breath. Then, in the distance, he heard it. Clank. Clank. The chains. His grip on the knife tightened. He looked around. "Who's there?" he called out. No response. Only a whisper, drifting through the darkness. "Have you come seeking death?" Ethan turned, knife raised. Before him, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, gaunt, with ashen skin and glowing red eyes. Blackened chains slithered across the ground, radiating an eerie, unnatural light. "The chained soul," Ethan muttered. He did not believe in ghosts, but this thing was standing right in front of him. "The curse was never meant for you, yet you have entered." The voice echoed, as if coming from multiple places at once. Ethan did not back down. "I don't believe in you." The chained soul chuckled. "You will..." The chains suddenly lashed out. Ethan dodged, but one wrapped around his wrist. A searing pain ripped through his skin. He screamed, struggling to break free. He slashed at the chain with his knife, but the blade passed through as if cutting through air. The chained soul moved closer, whispering, "Do you want to know what happened to the others?" The darkness around Ethan shifted, and suddenly he saw them, the missing villagers, standing there, their faces blank, eyes lifeless. Shackles bound their bodies, dragging them toward an endless abyss. "No, this isn't real," Ethan whispered. He had been wrong. The chained soul did not kill them. It made them part of itself. And now, it was his turn. The chains tightened, pulling him down. Ethan struggled, desperately trying to convince himself this wasn't real. But the pain was too real. His soul began to crack, dissolving into the darkness. "You are one of us now," the voice whispered. His body grew cold. His consciousness faded away. By morning, the villagers noticed Ethan was gone. But when night fell, a new sound echoed from the forest. The chains, heavier than before, and a new voice, whispering from the darkness. A curse that never ends.